Meanwhile, Taiwan also maintains a smaller but significant presence in the area, further complicating the dispute. The ongoing tensions over the Paracel Islands reflect the broader geopolitical struggles in the South China Sea, where access to valuable resources and strategic maritime routes are at stake. The South China Sea, an expansive body of water spanning over 3.5 million square kilometers, has often been referred to as the throat of global commerce. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, roughly one-third of global shipping, valued at over $3 trillion, passes through its waters annually. Renowned historian Geoffrey Blaney, in his seminal work, The Tyranny of Distance, poignantly encapsulated the strategic importance of maritime routes and choke points, with the South China Sea serving as a prime example in the contemporary era. This maritime region's significance is not just tied to global commerce. Beneath its waters lie vast, untapped reserves of natural resources. As noted by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the South China Sea holds proven oil reserves of at least 7 billion barrels and an estimated 900 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. These figures have led scholars like Robert D. Kaplan in his book Asia's Cauldron to draw parallels between the South China Sea and the oil-rich Middle East, particularly in the context of their geopolitical implications. However, it's not merely the allure of resources or strategic trade routes that elevates the South China Sea's importance on the world stage. It is, in fact, the overlapping territorial claims that have turned this maritime heartland into a crucible of geopolitical tension. As Kissinger remarked in World Order, territorial disputes can evoke primal emotions, and the South China Sea is no exception. China's 9-line claim has especially been a flashpoint, with countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan all positing conflicting territorial assertions. In essence, the South China Sea is not just a body of water. It's a nexus of global interests, economic ambitions, and deep-seated nationalistic fervors. The intertwining of these factors makes it one of the most contentious and consequential geopolitical arenas in the 21st century. Delving into the annals of history, the South China Sea has always been more than just a body of water. It has been a nexus for cultural exchange, economic trade, and geopolitical maneuvering. In the words of the historian Fernand Braudel, the seas have been the matrix of civilization. The South China Sea stands as a testament to this observation. From the days of the maritime Silk Road, a network of sea routes that connected China's southern ports to Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Arabia, and East Africa, the South China Sea served as a crucial conduit. As detailed in Louise Levatha's When China Ruled the Seas during the Ming Dynasty, Admiral Zheng He's treasure fleets embarked on 7 ambitious voyages, passing through the South China Sea to reach distant lands. These voyages were not just maritime explorations, but diplomatic missions, establishing tributary relations and forging alliances. Beyond the Chinese sphere, other civilizations also left their indelible marks on the region. The Srivijaya Empire, based on Sumatra in present-day Indonesia from the 7th to the 14th centuries, controlled the strategic Strait of Malacca and maintained a dominant naval presence in the South China Sea. Similarly, the Champa Kingdom of central Vietnam was another maritime power that asserted its influence. Ancient claims in the South China Sea were more fluid than they are today. While the concept of sovereignty as we understand it in the Westphalian sense was not prevalent, historical records and artifacts, such as pottery shards and shipwrecks, attest to a vibrant tapestry of trade, migration, and occasional skirmishes. For example, the Paracel and Spratly Islands, the flashpoints of many modern territorial disputes, have been historically referenced in various accounts.
The South China Sea, I don't think they've handled it very well anyway, to be honest with you. I don't think they're very clear what they want. There's various different agencies in China that are responsible for the South China Sea, and they actually speak with different voices.
Chinese records from the Tang and Song dynasties mention these islands, but there are also references in Vietnamese annals and maps dating back to their early dynastic periods. Yet, as the historian Julian Go notes in Patterns of Empire, The imposition of European colonial frameworks in the 19th and 20th centuries fundamentally transformed how territories were claimed and borders drawn. The South China Sea was no exception. As European powers delineated their spheres of influence, they introduced a modern paradigm of territoriality, inadvertently sowing the seeds for the geopolitical contests of the present day.
That's my feeling, that the South China Sea situation will continue to simmer but not boil over.
As we transition from the historical to the contemporary, the South China Sea's narrative becomes one of competing territorial claims, each anchored in historical assertions and nationalistic ambitions. As Samuel P. Huntington remarked in The Clash of Civilizations, the borders of nations often become flashpoints of conflict. And in the South China Sea, these borders are frequently fluid, contested, and overlapping. The heart of China's claim in the South China Sea lies within the ambiguously demarcated 9-dash line. This line, appearing first on Chinese maps in the 1940s, envelopes nearly 90% of the South China Sea, stretching far from the mainland and close to the coasts of other claimant states. China often roots its claims in historical voyages, ancient maps, and archaeological findings. For instance, Beijing references the voyages of Admiral Zheng He and older dynastic records as evidence of historical Chinese presence and thus sovereignty. Furthermore, as Bill Hayton posits in The South China Sea, The Struggle for Power in Asia, China's claims are not merely territorial, but deeply intertwined with nationalistic sentiments and the narrative of historical rights. Manila's claims in the South China Sea center predominantly around the Scarborough Shoal and the Spratly Islands. The Philippines' arguments are based on geographical proximity and historical interactions. The Scarborough Shoal, known locally as Bajo de Masinloc, has been reflected in Philippine maps since the late 18th century. Moreover, the Treaty of Paris, 1898, and subsequent American colonial-era treaties are cited to validate Philippine sovereignty over parts of the Spratly Islands. Hanoi's claims over the Paracel and Spratly Islands are rooted in historical records and continuous administrative actions. Vietnam cites ancient texts and maps dating back to the Nguyen dynasty to assert its historical connections to both island groups. The contention between China and Vietnam over the Paracels came to a head in 1974 with a brief but significant naval skirmish, resulting in Chinese control of the archipelago. Both nations staked their claims on parts of the Spratly Islands based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS principles, emphasizing their exclusive economic zones, EEZ. For Malaysia, features like Swallow Reef have been developed and maintained for maritime and aviation purposes. Brunei, in its subdued claim, focuses on Louisa Reef, citing its EEZ and continental shelf rights. Despite its distinct political trajectory from the People's Republic of China, Taiwan's claims in the South China Sea closely mirror those of Beijing, largely a legacy of the post-World War II period, when the Republic of China first made the 11-dash line claim, which was later reduced to the 9-dash line. Taiwan maintains a notable presence on Taiping Island, the largest of the Spratly Islands. While Indonesia doesn't claim any of the disputed islands, tensions have arisen due to China's 9-dash line overlapping with Indonesia's EEZ near the Natuna Islands. While traditionally maintaining an outsider stance in recent years, skirmishes between Chinese vessels and Indonesian Navy near the Natunas have heightened concerns. As observed by Donald E. Weatherby in Indonesia in ASEAN, Vision and Reality, Indonesia's strategic positioning often forces it into a delicate balancing act. In sum, the South China Sea is more than just a geopolitical chessboard. It's a reflection of the age-old tensions between history and modernity, national pride and international law, ambition and reality.
I think China is serious about this. I think Indonesia, being the farthest away from China, probably has experienced some of the least coercion. But quite clearly, China is intending to throw its weight around.
As the claims and counterclaims in the South China Sea grew more convoluted, the imperatives of international law and diplomacy assumed greater prominence. To disentangle the territorial web and ensure peaceful coexistence, nations turned to structured legal frameworks and multilateral forums. Often referred to as the Constitution for the Oceans, UNCLOS, ratified in 1982, sought to establish a comprehensive legal framework for the world's seas and oceans. Central to the South China Sea discourse are its provisions on territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, EEZs, and continental shelves. As Elizabeth Mann Borges writes in The Oceanic Circle, UNCLOS was a significant stride toward maritime governance, one that attempted to harmonize sovereign rights with international obligations. Under UNCLOS, coastal states are entitled to territorial seas extending up to 12 nautical miles from their coasts and have rights to exploit resources within a 200 nautical mile EEZ. These stipulations are pivotal for countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia when justifying their territorial claims. However, UNCLOS also grapples with features like islands, rocks, and atolls, the classification of which can impact maritime entitlements. Such nuances become contentious in areas like the Spratly Islands, where the distinction between islands and rocks significantly influences the extent of territorial waters and EEZs. This landmark ruling emerged as one of the most significant legal determinants concerning the South China Sea disputes. In 2013, following heightened tensions with China, the Philippines initiated an arbitration case under UNCLOS's dispute settlement mechanism, challenging several of China's claims and actions in the South China Sea. In July 2016, the tribunal issued its award, bringing forth several critical determinations. One, it rejected China's 9-dash line as having no legal basis under UNCLOS. Two, many of the features in the Spratly Islands were classified as rocks, not islands, thus not entitled to EEZs or continental shelves of their own. 3, China was found to have violated the Philippines' sovereign rights within its EEZ, especially concerning fishing and resource exploitation. 4, China's large-scale land reclamation and construction of artificial islands were deemed harmful to the marine environment, violating UNCLOS provisions. The tribunal's decision, while legally binding, lacked enforcement mechanisms.
The Philippines strongly affirms its respect for this milestone decision as an important contribution to ongoing efforts in addressing disputes in the South China Sea.
China rejected the ruling, emphasizing its non-participation in the arbitration process and continued to underscore its historical rights. The intricate dance between legal assertions and geopolitical realities in the South China Sea underscores a broader tension in international relations. The juxtaposition of international law's ideals against the pragmatic intricacies of state interests.
你非常准确地描述了中方的立场，因为我们确实是不承认，从一开始就不承认、不接受，所以呢，也不会跟这个所谓的非法的仲裁庭，发生任何可能产生法律上意义的司法，程序上的关系，我们也不会接受，他提供的所谓的任何的，不管是什么样的裁。
As E.H. Carr astutely noted in the 20 Years Crisis, while the structures of law and diplomacy provide a framework, the dynamics of power and perception inevitably shape outcomes. Beyond the immediate territorial disputes and the legal wrangling lies the South China Sea's overarching significance in global geopolitics. This stretch of water, surrounded by rapidly developing economies, represents a nexus of trade, resources, and strategic maneuvering. The South China Sea is undeniably one of the world's most critical maritime arteries. Acting as the gateway between the Pacific and Indian Oceans, it connects the dynamic economies of East and Southeast Asia with the energy-rich Middle East, Africa, and the broader global market. According to the International Energy Agency, approximately 1/3 of the world's maritime trade flows through its waters. This includes a significant proportion of global oil shipments, making it an essential energy lifeline for major economies, especially China, Japan, and South Korea. Dr. Robert D. Kaplan, in his book Asia's Cauldron, underscores this, noting that the South China Sea is to China what the Caribbean once was to the US, a body of water crucial for its commercial and naval supremacy. Beyond its function as a trade conduit, the South China Sea is endowed with abundant natural resources. Its fisheries are among the most productive in the world, supporting the livelihoods of millions in the surrounding countries. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the South China Sea accounts for a significant portion of the global fish catch, making it a critical food security zone. Yet, beneath its azure waters lies another treasure: vast reserves of hydrocarbons. While exact figures remain subjects of debate, the U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates the South China Sea to hold approximately 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proven and probable reserves. Some Chinese estimates are even more optimistic. These reserves, if tapped efficiently, could transform the energy landscape of Southeast Asia, reducing dependency on Middle Eastern oil and further intertwining the economies around the sea. The tranquil waves of the South China Sea belie an undercurrent of rising militarization and tensions. This region, once dominated primarily by fishing boats and commercial vessels, now witnesses warships, fighter jets, and military installations, reflecting a new era of strategic competition. China's land reclamation activities in the South China Sea have been the most conspicuous aspect of the region's militarization. Starting around 2013, China embarked on a massive project to transform reefs, atolls, and shoals, particularly in the Spratly Islands, into larger landmasses capable of supporting military infrastructure. Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef have been among the most significantly expanded. On some of these artificial islands, satellite imagery, as cited by the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, reveals airstrips long enough to accommodate fighter jets, advanced radar facilities, missile shelters, and deep water ports.
China has been creating artificial islands in the South China Sea and turning them into military bases. It is attempting to solidify its claims to the strategically vital waters of the South China Sea inside the so-called Nine-Dash Line. It is doing this for economic, military, and domestic political reasons.
While China's efforts are the most extensive, it's worth noting that other claimants, like Vietnam and the Philippines, have also developed features they control, albeit on a much smaller scale. As militarization progressed, the waters of the South China Sea have become a stage for strategic signaling and posturing, occasionally leading to skirmishes. In 2001, a U.S. Navy EP-3 surveillance plane and a Chinese jet fighter collided off Hainan Island, leading to a significant diplomatic standoff after the American plane made an emergency landing in China and its crew was detained.
I want to emphasize that the truth is that the US side stirred up troubles and made provocation first, while the Chinese side dealt with this in accordance with corresponding laws and regulations.
The Scarborough Shoal standoff in 2012 between Chinese and Philippine vessels marked a significant escalation. While initially a fishing-related dispute, it eventually saw both nations deploying naval assets, leading to heightened tensions. There have been multiple incidents involving U.S. naval vessels and Chinese ships, particularly during U.S. Freedom of Navigation operations, FONOPs, where the U.S. Navy sails close to disputed features to challenge excessive maritime claims. These operations have often been met with warnings and shadowing by the Chinese Navy or Coast Guard.
事实非常清楚，美方出于一己私利，抱持零和思维，不断在本地区加强军事部署，其结果必然是加剧局势紧张，危害地区和平稳定。地区国家应该深入地想一想，到底什么才是合适的，什么才是互利的，从而做出真正有利于自身利益、有利于地区和平稳定的选择。
Vietnam and China have also seen their share of confrontations. Notably, in 2014, China's placement of an oil rig, HD 981, in waters claimed by Vietnam led to a serious maritime standoff, with vessels from both sides reportedly ramming each other. The waters near the Natuna Islands have witnessed Indonesian authorities detaining Chinese fishing boats, with the Chinese Coast Guard sometimes intervening, reflecting the complexities even non-claimant states face. In the throes of escalating tensions, it's easy to overlook the persistent endeavors at peaceful resolution. However, amidst the militarization and sharp rhetoric, multilateral mechanisms and diplomatic dialogues have continuously worked to diffuse tensions and create a framework for cooperative engagement in the South China Sea.
I think the Philippines have every right to send their vessels, both commercial and military, anywhere they want in their exclusive economic zone, and China has no basis to claim that they need to remove it.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has been at the forefront of multilateral efforts to address the South China Sea disputes. While the body itself doesn't possess an enforcement mechanism, its importance lies in providing a platform for dialogue and consensus building among its members and with external powers, especially China. The most notable ASEAN-centered initiative has been the push for a Code of Conduct, COC, in the South China Sea. Initiated in the early 2000s, the COC seeks to establish guidelines for behavior in the disputed waters, ensuring that nations avoid actions that could escalate tensions. The 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, DOC, was an initial step, emphasizing the principles of the UN Charter and international law, particularly UN CLOS. However, crafting a binding COC has proven challenging, given the varying interests of ASEAN member states and China's assertive posture. Still, negotiations have persisted, reflecting the collective acknowledgement of the COC's potential in stabilizing the region. While multilateral mechanisms set the broad framework, the specifics are often ironed out in bilateral settings. Post the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling, there was a thaw in relations under Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, who sought closer ties with Beijing. This shift saw both countries initiating bilateral consultation mechanisms, specifically for the South China Sea, exploring joint resource exploration and crisis management measures. Both nations, despite their contentious history, have maintained a series of talks. These dialogues, often held annually, focus on confidence building, maritime safety, and potential cooperative projects. Malaysia has often preferred quiet diplomacy, engaging China directly to address overlapping claims. Such engagements have emphasized shared interests and mutual economic benefits. While the road to a comprehensive resolution remains fraught with obstacles, the consistent pursuit of dialogue underscores the region's aspiration for a peaceful and cooperative maritime order. As former ASEAN Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan remarked, "The strength of ASEAN is its process," emphasizing the continuous and patient diplomacy at play. In understanding the South China Sea's dynamics, it's pivotal to recognize both the immediate tensions and the underlying efforts to navigate them. For every tale of a skirmish, there's a parallel narrative of dialogue, underscoring the region's multifaceted character and the enduring hope for peaceful coexistence. The ripples of the South China Sea disputes traverse far beyond its immediate waters, influencing the strategic calculus of global powers and reshaping the tenor of international relations in the 21st century. Here's how the South China Sea becomes a microcosm of larger geopolitical dynamics, with significant implications for the world's leading powers. The South China Sea, with its strategic waterways and evolving power dynamics, is pivotal to U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific. While not a claimant state, the U.S. has consistently emphasized the importance of freedom of navigation and overflight. As the world's leading naval power, the U.S. Navy's Freedom of Navigation operations, FONOPs, are not just symbolic gestures, but tangible assertions of its vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The South China Sea also plays into broader U.S. concerns about China's rise. As pointed out in The Tragedy of Great Power Politics by John Mearsheimer, the interplay of a rising power and an established hegemon invariably leads to strategic competition. The militarization and territorial disputes in the South China Sea are emblematic of this larger Sino-American rivalry, where both powers seek to shape the region according to their strategic imperatives. Japan, heavily reliant on the free flow of goods and energy through the South China Sea, views the stability of this maritime region as crucial. Any disruption here threatens Japan's energy security and its economic vitality. While Japan doesn't have direct territorial stakes, it has been vocal about the rule of law and the importance of UNCLOS. Japan's proactive diplomacy, including capacity-building assistance to coastal Southeast Asian nations and joint exercises, underscores Tokyo's apprehensions about the changing status quo. As Shinzo Abe, Japan's former prime minister, often emphasized, Japan's proactive peace posture is intertwined with regional stability, especially in vital areas like the South China Sea. Australia finds itself in a delicate balancing act when it comes to the South China Sea. On one hand, its robust economic ties with China make it a significant stakeholder in the peaceful resolution of disputes. On the other hand, its long-standing strategic alliance with the US and shared democratic values with other regional players pull it towards a more assertive stance against any unilateral change to the maritime order. Australia's participation in multilateral naval exercises in the Indo-Pacific, including in proximity to the South China Sea, reflects its commitment to a rules-based regional order. The South China Sea, while geographically located in Southeast Asia, is a theater where global narratives intersect. As Dr. Henry Kissinger remarked in World Order, the intricacies of regional conflicts often draw in larger powers, not just because of immediate stakes, but due to the principles and order they represent. In a world marked by the interplay of globalization and geopolitics, the South China Sea stands as a testament to the complexities of international relations. The dynamics here, while rooted in historical and regional contexts, have profound implications for the trajectory of global power politics in the coming decades. The South China Sea, with its shimmering waters, has become the crucible for a multitude of intersecting interests, claims, and narratives. From deep historical roots to contemporary geopolitical aspirations, the intricacies of this maritime region stand as a reflection of the broader challenges our interconnected world faces today. It's more than just territorial disputes over islands and waters. It's a litmus test for international law, a gauge of great power rivalry, and a touchstone for regional cooperation. But as complex as the situation is, it's imperative to remember that the vast expanse of the sea itself signifies possibility. The possibility to navigate, negotiate, and find common ground. The stakes in the South China Sea are undeniably high. Yet, as history has shown us time and again, confrontations on such scales seldom benefit any party involved. Diplomatic channels, multilateral forums, and mutual respect for international laws and norms remain the beacon lights guiding nations toward peaceful coexistence. The ongoing dialogues, whether bilateral or under the auspices of ASEAN, show the collective yearning for a peaceful resolution, even amid the cacophony of competing interests. As vast and profound as the waters of the South China Sea are, so is the depth of the narratives that revolve around it. In our rapidly evolving world, staying informed and understanding the nuances behind headlines is more crucial than ever. Every wave in this sea tells a tale. Every diplomatic endeavor paints a picture of hope. Let's commit to deepening our understanding, fostering dialogues, and championing peaceful resolutions. Whether you're a student, a policymaker, or simply an engaged global citizen, your voice, your understanding, and your advocacy for peace can make a difference. In the immortal words of Mahatma Gandhi, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. Let that change be one of understanding, empathy, and commitment to a world where disputes are resolved not through might, but through dialogue and mutual respect. Thank you for journeying with us through the waters of the South China Sea. Stay curious, stay informed, and let's sail towards a brighter, more harmonious horizon together. In 1995, Filipino fishermen seeking shelter from a storm stumbled upon a curious sight in the South China Sea. What they thought was a safe haven turned out to be something far more controversial. Mischief Reef, with mysterious new structures built by foreign hands. This seemingly barren atoll, once a quiet fishing ground, has since become a flashpoint for geopolitical drama. Nations argue, navies patrol, and diplomats debate over its true ownership. But how did this reef, submerged at high tide and far from the shores of its contenders, become a symbol of power and dominance in one of the world's most contested waters? Let's unravel the intrigue surrounding Mischief Reef and its ownership. Mischief Reef, also known as Panganiban Reef in the Philippines and Meiji-jiao in China, is no ordinary speck of land in the South China Sea. Situated roughly 250 kilometers west of the Philippine island of Palawan, this low-tide elevation may seem unremarkable at first glance. But don't be fooled. This coral reef has become a microcosm of the fierce geopolitical struggle playing out across one of the world's busiest waterways. Once a quiet fishing ground for locals, Mischief Reef now stands at the epicenter of heated debates over sovereignty, control, and maritime power. The answer to this seemingly simple question is anything but straightforward. China, the Philippines, and Vietnam all lay claim to this strategic reef, making its ownership one of the most contested issues in modern geopolitics. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that Mischief Reef lies within the Philippines' Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, and has no legal basis as Chinese territory. Yet, China's sprawling military installations on the reef, complete with airstrips, radar systems, and hangars, paint a different picture, one of power projection and dominance. The reef is now a fortified stronghold, sparking alarm across Southeast Asia and beyond. The stakes couldn't be higher. The South China Sea is more than just a patch of ocean. It's a maritime superhighway carrying over $3.4 trillion in annual trade. Beneath its waves lies untapped oil and gas reserves that could power entire nations, while its waters teem with some of the world's richest fishing grounds. Control of key locations like Mischief Reef isn't just about territorial pride. It's about commanding vital resources, trade routes, and strategic military footholds. As the region's nations and external powers like the United States clash over this prized body of water, one thing is clear: the battle for Mischief Reef is far from over, and its story is one the world can't afford to ignore. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, the Philippines holds a strong legal basis for its claim over Mischief Reef. Located just 250 kilometers from Palawan, the reef lies well within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ, granting the country sovereign rights to explore and exploit marine resources in the area. Mischief Reef is not just close to Philippine shores, it's far from China's mainland, more than 1,200 kilometers away, raising fundamental questions about Beijing's territorial assertions. Adding complexity to the dispute, Mischief Reef is classified as a submerged feature, which, according to international law, cannot be claimed as sovereign territory by any nation. Instead, such features are considered part of the seabed and subject to the exclusive economic zone of the nearest coastal state. For the Philippines, this legal clarity under UNCLOS is central to its argument. Mischief Reef lies within its exclusive economic zone, making China's occupation and fortification a clear violation of Philippine rights. In a historic decision, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, in The Hague ruled decisively in favor of the Philippines in 2016, rejecting China's sweeping claims over the South China Sea. The tribunal concluded that Beijing's 9-dash line, a loosely defined boundary encompassing nearly 90% of the South China Sea, had no basis in international law. Specifically regarding Mischief Reef, the PCA determined that Mischief Reef is a low-tide elevation, meaning it cannot generate territorial seas or exclusive economic zones. The reef lies entirely within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, granting the Philippines sovereign rights over its resources. China's activities, including the construction of artificial islands and military facilities, violated the Philippines' sovereign rights. The tribunal's scathing critique of China's actions is summed up in its findings. China has no historic rights to resources within the sea areas falling within the 9-dash line. This legal declaration invalidated China's expansive claims, reaffirming the Philippines' rightful position under international law. The PCA's decision marked a watershed moment for the Philippines, delivering a significant legal and moral victory in one of the most contentious maritime disputes of modern times. It underscored the principle that might does not make right and bolstered the rules-based international order. However, while the ruling is legally binding, China has dismissed it outright, continuing its activities on Mischief Reef and other contested areas. For the Philippines, the ruling is both a validation of its sovereignty and a rallying point for international support. The challenge remains: how can Manila enforce its legal win in the face of a rising superpower determined to reshape the South China Sea? The answer to that question will shape the future of this vital maritime region. China's claim to Mischief Reef, like much of the South China Sea, is rooted in its controversial 9-dash line, a boundary first published on maps in the 1940s that encompasses nearly 90% of the sea. Beijing asserts that its fishermen and traders have used the South China Sea for centuries, reinforcing its narrative of historic rights. However, this claim is hotly contested, as international law, including UNCLOS, does not recognize historical maps as a valid basis for maritime entitlements. China often invokes the principle of indisputable sovereignty to justify its control over the region. By framing its South China Sea claims as a matter of national pride and territorial integrity, Beijing positions itself as unwilling to compromise, further complicating diplomatic efforts. Yet critics argue that China's historical narrative is selective and lacks concrete evidence to substantiate its expansive claims, especially over submerged features like Mischief Reef. The 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, which invalidated China's claims under the 9-dash line, was outrightly dismissed by Beijing, labeling the tribunal as illegitimate and its decision as null and void. China has refused to participate in or recognize the proceedings. Beijing's rationale? It argues that the tribunal lacked jurisdiction over matters involving territorial sovereignty and insists that its claims predate UNCLOS, making them immune to such rulings. China's rejection reflects a broader strategy. Asserting its dominance while disregarding international legal frameworks it perceives as unfavorable. By ignoring the PCA ruling, Beijing has signaled its intent to settle disputes on its own terms, often through a combination of diplomatic pressure, economic leverage, and military might. China's activities on Mischief Reef have transformed it from a submerged coral atoll into a strategic military stronghold. Since the mid-2010s, Beijing has conducted massive land reclamation projects, creating over 550 hectares of artificial land. Satellite imagery reveals a sprawling military complex, including airstrips, radar systems, hangars for combat aircraft, harbors for warships, and missile defense systems. These installations are not just symbolic, they're strategic assets aimed at projecting power across the South China Sea. For the Philippines and other claimant states, China's militarization of Mischief Reef poses significant challenges. It undermines Philippine sovereignty, threatens the region's stability, and raises concerns about Beijing's long-term intentions. China's fortified presence on Mischief Reef effectively turns it into an unsinkable aircraft carrier, giving Beijing a strategic advantage in the South China Sea. The South China Sea dispute is not just a bilateral tug-of-war between the Philippines and China, it's a multilateral conundrum involving Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, all of whom have competing claims to portions of the sea. Vietnam asserts historical sovereignty over large sections of the Spratly and Paracel Islands, bolstered by its continuous presence and activities in the region. Malaysia claims parts of the Spratly Islands based on their proximity to its continental shelf, while Brunei stakes a modest claim to the southern reaches of the Spratly chain, aligning with its exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Although their territorial claims do not directly extend to Mischief Reef, these nations view China's actions on the reef and the broader South China Sea with growing unease. Beijing's militarization and its sweeping nine-dash line affect their own economic and security interests, creating a shared sense of vulnerability and urgency. Vietnam has been particularly vocal in its opposition to China's aggressive tactics, frequently lodging formal protests and deploying naval forces in disputed areas. Its historical claims to the Spratlys overlap with China's, and the country perceives Beijing's actions at Mischief Reef as part of a broader strategy to undermine Vietnamese sovereignty. Similarly, Malaysia, which has traditionally pursued quieter diplomacy, has begun taking a firmer stance in recent years, filing submissions to the United Nations to affirm its maritime rights. Brunei, while generally more reserved, quietly aligns with ASEAN's collective calls for the peaceful resolution of disputes and adherence to international law. For these nations, the implications of China's militarization of Mischief Reef are clear. It sets a dangerous precedent, enabling Beijing to unilaterally alter the region's balance of power and diminish their own claims. Recognizing the need for unity in the face of China's assertiveness, South China Sea nations have occasionally banded together to voice their concerns. ASEAN, the regional bloc that includes all claimant states, has repeatedly emphasized the importance of peace, stability, and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Though its statements are often carefully worded to avoid alienating China, ASEAN has called for the early conclusion of a code of conduct, a legally binding agreement to manage disputes in the region. On bilateral levels, Vietnam and the Philippines have enhanced their maritime cooperation, conducting joint naval drills and sharing intelligence to counterbalance China's dominance. In 2024, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines issued coordinated protests against China's establishment of new administrative districts in disputed territories, signaling a growing willingness to present a unified front. While collective action remains challenging due to differing national interests and levels of dependence on China, the overlapping concerns of South China Sea nations highlight the need for greater collaboration. For Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, China's actions at Mischief Reef are not just a Philippine problem. They are a regional issue that threatens the sovereignty and security of all claimant states. Whether through ASEAN or smaller coalitions, the road ahead will likely demand a balance of diplomacy, legal action, and strategic partnerships to address an increasingly assertive China. The South China Sea is far more than a regional dispute. It's a critical artery of global commerce with 1/3 of the world's maritime trade, worth an estimated $3.4 trillion annually, passing through its waters. As China builds military installations on features like Mischief Reef and asserts dominance through its expansive nine-dash line, the international community has grown increasingly alarmed. Beijing's actions threaten to upend the delicate balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, sparking fears of militarized conflict and economic disruption in one of the world's most vital regions. For many nations, the South China Sea is a test case for the broader principle of respecting international law and the sovereignty of smaller states. China's refusal to abide by the 2016 PCA ruling and its aggressive reclamation projects are widely seen as violations of international norms, raising concerns about Beijing's willingness to flout global rules in pursuit of unilateral gains. At the heart of the international community's concerns is the principle of freedom of navigation. With vital sea lanes cutting through the South China Sea, ensuring unimpeded access for commercial and military vessels is a global priority. China's militarization of Mischief Reef and its harassment of foreign vessels have cast a shadow over this freedom, prompting fears of restricted access or outright blockades. Upholding the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, is seen as critical not only for resolving disputes, but for maintaining peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific. The international community has repeatedly emphasized the need for all parties to adhere to the rule of law. In recent years, global powers have stressed that the PCA ruling, while unenforceable, serves as a legal benchmark that must be respected to preserve the integrity of international maritime law. The United States has taken a leading role in countering China's assertiveness, conducting regular freedom of navigation operations, phone ops, in the South China Sea. These patrols, often near disputed features like Mischief Reef, are designed to challenge Beijing's excessive maritime claims and affirm the rights of all nations to operate in international waters. U.S. allies such as Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom have also joined these efforts, conducting joint naval exercises to demonstrate a unified front. Beyond military actions, Western nations have provided diplomatic and economic support to Southeast Asian states, empowering them to resist Chinese coercion. In 2024, the G7 issued a strong statement reaffirming the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific and condemning actions that undermine regional stability. International organizations have also weighed in on the South China Sea dispute. ASEAN has consistently issued statements calling for peace, stability, and adherence to international law, though its language has often been cautious to avoid alienating China. The UN has refrained from taking a direct role, but its specialized tribunals, such as the PCA, have provided a legal framework for resolving disputes. More pointedly, the European Union, NATO, and other global bodies have expressed solidarity with Southeast Asian nations, emphasizing the importance of multilateralism in addressing the South China Sea issue. Resolutions from the European Parliament and joint statements from Quad members, Australia, India, Japan, and the US, have further highlighted the stakes of the dispute for global security. The South China Sea represents a litmus test for the international community's ability to uphold the rule of law and resist unilateral aggression. For smaller claimant states, global involvement provides a critical counterweight to China's dominance. For major powers, the dispute is part of a broader contest over the shape of the 21st century world order, one defined by rules, not raw power. As the situation at Mischief Reef and beyond continues to evolve, the response of the international community will be pivotal in shaping the region's future. In 2012, China and the Philippines faced off over Scarborough Shoal when Philippine authorities attempted to arrest Chinese fishermen within the country's exclusive economic zone. Chinese vessels intervened, leading to a weeks-long standoff that ended with China gaining control of the shoal. This incident set a precedent for China's assertive tactics, including deploying maritime militias to reinforce claims. The South China Sea accounts for 12% of the global fish catch, making it a critical resource. Filipino fishermen near Mischief Reef face harassment from Chinese vessels, often backed by Beijing's maritime militia. Incidents like the 2019 ramming of a Filipino fishing boat near Recto Bank highlight the human toll of the dispute. China's overfishing has depleted stocks, severely impacting local livelihoods in the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The South China Sea is estimated to hold 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. China's interference has derailed Philippine energy projects, while Beijing continues unilateral drilling. These actions fuel diplomatic protests and naval confrontations as seen in disputes with Vietnam and Malaysia. Mischief Reef, now a militarized artificial island, hosts runways, radars, and missile systems, making it a strategic hub for China. The US and allies like Japan and Australia have responded with increased naval patrols and joint military exercises with the Philippines to counter Chinese dominance. For Filipino coastal communities, the Mischief Reef dispute threatens survival. Fishing bans, harassment, and environmental degradation have destroyed coral reefs and depleted fish stocks. Many fishermen, lacking government support, are forced to fish in less productive areas, leading to financial and social hardship. In 2025, tensions surrounding Mischief Reef in the South China Sea remain high. China has significantly increased its maritime militia presence at the reef, aiming to assert control and deter Philippine resupply missions to nearby outposts. This escalation has led to heightened confrontations between Chinese and Philippine forces, raising concerns about potential conflicts involving regional allies such as the United States. In response, The Philippines has enacted new legislation to reaffirm its jurisdiction and resource rights in its maritime territories, including areas encompassing Mischief Reef.
The first law is the Philippine Maritime Zones Act, which clearly defines the extent of our maritime entitlements and fully declares their metes and bounds in accordance with our Constitution and with the UNCLOS. Our people, especially our fisherfolk, should be able to pursue their livelihood free from uncertainty and harassment.
These moves have been met with strong protests from China, which continues to assert expansive claims over nearly the entire South China Sea. The South China Sea remains a volatile region, with the risk of miscalculation or accidental clashes increasing due to the dense presence of military and civilian vessels from multiple nations. China's continued militarization of features like Mischief Reef, coupled with its development of new island-building technologies, suggests a potential for further escalation. The Philippines' recent legislative actions to demarcate its maritime zones may lead to more assertive enforcement of its claims, potentially resulting in direct confrontations with Chinese forces. Additionally, the involvement of external powers conducting freedom of navigation operations in the area adds another layer of complexity to the dispute. Despite the escalating tensions, diplomatic avenues remain crucial for de-escalation. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, continues to advocate for a legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea, though progress has been slow. Confidence-building measures, such as joint resource exploration and agreements on fishing rights, could serve as initial steps toward easing tensions. International legal mechanisms, including the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling, provide a framework for resolving disputes, though enforcement remains a challenge. Greater involvement from global powers advocating for the rule of law could pressure claimant nations to adhere to international norms. The situation at Mischief Reef exemplifies the broader challenges in the South China Sea, a region where strategic interests, national pride, and international law intersect. The actions taken by China and the Philippines in recent months have heightened tensions, underscoring the need for effective diplomatic engagement and adherence to international legal frameworks. The future of Mischief Reef and the broader South China Sea will depend on the collective resolve of nations to manage their disputes peacefully and cooperatively. The international community's commitment to upholding the rule of law and ensuring freedom of navigation will play a pivotal role in shaping the region's stability in the years to come. Thank you for tuning into our channel. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis of global issues. The Spratly Islands, a disputed archipelago in the South China Sea, stretch off the coasts of Malaysia, southern Vietnam, and the Philippines. This archipelago comprises of islands, islets, cays, and over 100 reefs, sometimes forming sunken ancient atolls. Despite covering an area of over 425,000 square kilometers, the islands have less than 2 square kilometers of naturally occurring land. They were named after British whaling captain Richard Spratly, who sighted Spratly Island in 1843. Strategically located along vital shipping routes, the Spratly Islands present significant geopolitical and economic opportunities, as well as challenges in Southeast Asia. Although largely uninhabited, they are crucial for establishing international borders due to their rich fishing grounds and potential reserves of natural gas and oil. While civilian settlements exist on a few islands, approximately 45 islands, cays, reefs, and shoals host military installations from Malaysia, China, PRC, Taiwan, ROC, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Additionally, Brunei claims an exclusive economic zone encompassing the uninhabited Louisa Reef in the southeastern Spratly Islands. In 1939, the Spratly Islands were coral islets mainly inhabited by seabirds. Though naturally consisting of 19 islands, a 1986 Chinese source notes 14 islands or islets, 6 banks, 113 submerged reefs, 35 underwater banks, and 21 underwater shoals. The northeastern area, known as Dangerous Ground, is perilous for navigation due to its numerous low islands, sunken reefs, and degraded submerged atolls with coral that often rises abruptly from depths exceeding 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet. Each island is a cay, or sand island, formed on an ancient, eroded, and buried coral reef. The Spratly Islands, composed of biogenic carbonate, lack significant agricultural land, and few possess reliable sources of drinkable water. However, their resources include huge reserves of natural gas, oil, seafood, and guano. Economic activities in the region have historically included commercial fishing, shipping, guano mining, and oil and gas extraction, with tourism emerging more recently. Global shipping lanes near the Spratly Islands further enhances their strategic importance. Let us dive deep for a deep analysis of who owns the Spratly Islands. The Spratly Islands, comprising over 100 small islands and reefs, are surrounded by rich fishing grounds and potentially significant gas and oil reserves. Various countries claim parts of the islands. Malaysia and the Philippines have partial claims, while China, Taiwan, and Vietnam claim the entire archipelago. Approximately 45 islands are occupied by relatively small military units from China, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Although Brunei has not officially claimed the southern reef, it has asserted a portion of its continental shelf, overlapping with the reef since 1985, and claims an exclusive economic zone in the area. The territorial dispute over the Spratly Islands involves Brunei, China, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam, with each nation seeking to advance its territorial claims. This conflict is marked by diplomatic deadlock and military pressure, including the occupation of disputed territories. The majority of the maritime features in the Spratly Islands have multiple names, an international name typically in English, Chinese names that may vary between the PRC and ROC, names used by the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia, and occasionally names with European origins, such as French, Portuguese, Spanish, or British. For example, Spratly Island is also known as Storm Island. The strategic location of the region allows nations to project military power and monitor maritime activity. The Philippines claims part of the region under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, a convention partially ratified by the nations involved in the dispute. However, only China, PRC, Taiwan, ROC, and Vietnam have asserted historical sovereignty over the islands. The People's Republic of China, PRC, bases its claims to the Spratly Islands on historical evidence rather than the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Despite signing the UNCLOS on July 29, 1994, the PRC maintains that it owns the entirety of the Spratly Islands. Similarly, the Republic of China, ROC, which governed mainland China until 1949 and has since been limited to Taiwan, claims all the Spratly Islands. China asserts that the islands were discovered during the Han Dynasty in 2 BC and supposedly marked on maps from the Eastern Han and Eastern Wu periods. However, there are no surviving maps from these eras, leaving the current Chinese government to substantiate these claims. The Yuanqi, an official history commissioned by the Ming Dynasty in 1369, suggests that several islands, possibly the Spratlys, were considered Chinese territory since the Yuan Dynasty in the 12th century. Maps from the Qing Dynasty, 1755 to 1912, also reportedly marked these islands as Chinese territory. Archaeological findings of Chinese coins and pottery in the islands are used as evidence by the PRC, although these artifacts likely came from passing Chinese junks. In the 19th century, Europeans noted that Chinese fishermen from Hainan spent part of the year in the Spratlys. The British made the first formal legal claims in 1877. China protested German surveying efforts in 1883 and dispatched naval missions to the islands in 1902 and 1907, marking them with flags and monuments. The Republic of China, which succeeded the Qing Dynasty, continued to assert sovereignty over the Spratlys and Paracels. Japan took control of the islands from France in 1939, but after World War II, the Allied forces designated the Republic of China to accept Japanese surrenders in these islands. The Republic of China garrisoned Itu Aba, Taiping Island, in 1946, raising Chinese flags and establishing markers, despite French objections. The ROC's 1947 map depicted its U-shaped claim over the entire South China Sea, including the Spratlys and Paracels. Taiwan maintained a garrison on Itu Aba from 1946 to 1950 and resumed it in 1956, considered an effective occupation of the islands. Despite the PRC providing geographic baselines to the UN in 1996, excluding the Spratlys, Taiwan resisted Philippine attempts to establish a presence in the islands before 1971. In 2024, China continued to assert its claims over the Spratly Islands, citing historical sovereignty based on ancient maps and records. The Chinese government argues that these documents demonstrate a long-standing presence and control, justifying their contemporary claims. This forms part of China's broader strategy to establish dominance in the South China Sea. Despite overlapping claims from the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan, China's expansive claim is encapsulated by the new 10-dash line, covering approximately 90% of the South China Sea. Despite a 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, which found no legal basis for China's extensive claims, Beijing rejected the decision and continued to build and militarize artificial islands in the Spratlys. This includes constructing runways, missile systems, and other military infrastructure, significantly increasing regional tensions. Diplomatically, China has engaged in prolonged negotiations with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, to establish a code of conduct for the South China Sea, though progress remains slow and contentious.
China and ASEAN countries enjoy geographical proximity and close affinity. We have adhered to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
In 2024, the Philippines continues to assert its claims over portions of the Spratly Islands, emphasizing both historical presence and proximity to its territory. The Philippines bases its claims on historical evidence of Filipino fishermen using these islands for centuries and their location within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Key features claimed by the Philippines include Pag-asa, Thitu Island, the largest island in the Spratlys, as well as Second Thomas Shoal and Mischief Reef. The Philippines maintains a small military presence on some of these islands and has pursued various legal and diplomatic avenues to support its claims. Notably, the Philippines won a landmark case in 2016 when the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in favor of the Philippines against China's expansive claims. Despite this legal victory, the Philippines faces challenges in enforcing the ruling and managing tensions in the region. The country also seeks to strengthen regional cooperation through the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and engages in bilateral discussions with China and other claimant countries.
The early conclusion of an effective and substantive COC that is in accordance with international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS, remains the goal for ASEAN and for China.
Likewise, the Moro people referred to as the Filipino Muslims and their region in the southern Philippines. According to information from the Sultan of Sulu, the ancestors of the Moro people owned the Spratly Islands before Spanish colonists arrived in the 16th century. They claim that the Spratly Islands are part of the ancestral property of the Moro people and thus outside Chinese jurisdiction, and the Spratly Archipelago is part of the Sulu Sea, within the area known as the West Philippine Sea, which the Philippines claims as part of its EEZ. Vietnam's historical connection to the Spratly Islands, known as Truong Sa, dates back centuries, with records of Vietnamese occupation, resource exploitation, and governmental control extending to the 1600s, although their involvement likely began much earlier. Vietnam's claim is based on the principle of terra nullius, land belonging to no state, asserting that it has owned and occupied the territory since at least the 17th century. According to international law, the state of Vietnam took effective possession of the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa archipelagos long ago, when they were not under the sovereignty of any nation. Vietnam emphasizes its historical exercise of authority and control over the islands. The first known instance of formal sovereignty was in the 1600s when the archipelago was placed under the administrative jurisdiction of the Binh Son district. For the next 2 centuries, pre-colonial Vietnamese governments maintained uncontested state sovereignty over the archipelago. Even after France assumed control of Vietnam through the 1887 treaty, European powers upheld and strengthened Vietnamese authority over Truong Sa on behalf of the Vietnamese state. The French acquisition of the islands further validates Vietnam's administrative sovereignty claims in the modern era. After World War II, when Japan relinquished its claims to the islands, the Republic of Vietnam, RVN, continued to assert sovereignty over Truong Sa. This included protesting foreign claims, occupying the archipelago, and re-annexing the chain in 1956. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam, as the successor to the RVN, has consistently upheld Vietnamese sovereignty, even engaging in armed combat to protect its control over the islands. The Vietnamese government declared, "The state of Vietnam has always actively defended its rights and titles against all schemes and acts of encroachment upon sovereignty, territorial integrity, and interests of Vietnam in connection with the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa archipelagos. In the contemporary era, Vietnam occupies up to 24 features in the Spratly Islands, more than twice as many as any other claimant. At least 5 of these features are garrisoned by around 1,000 soldiers or sailors and construction workers. This de facto control bolsters Vietnam's historical claims. The Law of the Sea Convention of 1982 further supports Vietnam's rights to the Truong Sa. Vietnam argues that the Truong Sa Islands do not generate their own continental shelves or exclusive economic zones, EEZs. Claimant states, according to Vietnam, should be entitled to a full 200 nautical mile EEZ generated from their main coastal or large island land areas, with high seas areas beyond 200 nautical miles governed by the International Seabed Authority. Vietnamese sovereignty claims extend to the entire archipelago, asserting a 12 nautical mile territorial water zone for each island. Additionally, Vietnam claims a 350 nautical mile continental shelf extending from its southeast coast towards Truong Sa. This claim is supported by seafloor geography, unlike similar claims by Malaysia, Brunei, or the Philippines. Vietnam's maritime heritage is deep-rooted, with historical accounts suggesting a strong seafaring tradition. While it is debatable whether the Vietnamese were the first to discover, manage, or use the islands, there is no denying their long history with Truong Sa. Vietnam's historical claims, based on first occupation and ancient sovereignty, are validated by continuous dominance over most of the archipelago for over 300 years. This ongoing sovereignty serves as the foundation for Hanoi's legal claims. Vietnam has demonstrated its political will to maintain control over the islands through diplomatic and military means. This is partly in response to perceived Chinese encroachment into Southeast Asia. Vietnam's history of resisting foreign occupation, including conflicts with China in 1979, the proxy war in Cambodia, and the 1988 fighting in Truong Sa, signifies this determination. The Vietnamese military's persistent presence in Truong Sa is evidence of Hanoi's resolve not to relinquish what it considers historic territory, even while expressing willingness to take the case to the International Court of Justice and engage in multilateral negotiations. Thus, Vietnam's resolve to assert its claims and influence over the Spratly Islands remains steadfast, similar to the relentless tides washing over the archipelago. 6 additional countries, Brunei, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, have maritime borders with Malaysia. Compared to the rest of Malaysia's marine area, these borders are more pronounced in the South China Sea due to the concentration of littoral countries. Malaysia's South China Sea maritime area is essentially divided in half, with Indonesia's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, separating the two sections. The eastern segment includes the Malaysian states of Sabah and Sarawak on the island of Borneo, while the western part is along the east coast of peninsular Malaysia. The East Malaysian portion of the South China Sea is the most disputed, particularly due to conflicting claims over the Spratly Islands. Malaysia claims 12 maritime features in the Spratly Islands, which include atolls, rocks, reefs, shoals, and islands. Of these, Malaysia maintains a physical presence on 5 features: Terumbu Ubi, Ardassia Reef; Terumbu Siput, Erica Reef; Terumbu Mantanani, Marivelis Reef; Terumbu Penenjau, Investigator Reef; and Pulau Layang Layang, Swallow Reef. 2 other features, Pulau Amboina Kasil, Amboina Cay, and Terumbu Laksamana, Commodore Reef, are occupied by Vietnam and the Philippines, respectively, despite falling within Malaysia's claimed area. In 1978, Malaysian special forces briefly landed on Pulau Amboina and erected markers, which were later removed by Vietnamese forces. Malaysia's efforts to assert its claims escalated with the occupation of Pulau Layang Layang, Swallow Reef, by Special Operations Forces in May 1983. This action marked the beginning of incremental claims over other locations in the region. Responses provided by the Malaysian government to Senator Tunku Abdul Aziz on matters pertaining to the South China Sea and the Spratly Islands reflect the country's official stance on these claims. In 2024, Malaysia continued to assert its claims over portions of the